Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest. It's the podcast for Backlot Banter, where we view and review every single Palme d'Or winner. We're talking about the Cannes Festival. As always, today we have the film The White Ribbon, otherwise known as Das Weiße Band einer deutsche Kindergeschichte. That's a hard German word to say. I've never been able to do it right.
Yeah.
It's
all 300 times you've tried.
This is take 301 of the intro, by the way. Yeah.
301. A film by Michael Haneke from the year 2009, although, if you would believe it, it does not take place then. It takes place about 100 years prior, in the dawn of the 20th century. I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say about this one, because I have some thoughts, and we are going to get down to business after our little housekeeping here and talk about The White Ribbon. Okay, last week we did The Tin Drum, also German, also war, not black and white though. That got a 6.5 out of 10, ending it at the 15th spot on our list, below A Man and a Woman and above Taste of Cherry. So there you have it. Let's keep this train moving. Although there's no trains in this movie, sadly.
No.
Abram,
Quite low tech in that way.
Yeah, it's quite a low-tech movie. Do you have a comment from one of our beloved viewers over the past week?
This is going to take us back to a review of The Umbrellas of Cherbourg from who I believe is a new viewer, although I might be wrong.
I didn't recognize this commenter's name.
Elvira Johnson 9396, who says the following.
Well, first of all, welcome.
Of course.
Hey,
welcome
Elvira.
in. Really happy to have you back for a review of The White Ribbon.
That's a likely scenario.
You said here, interesting discussion, guys. The other big Jacques Demy film is Young Girls of how do you say that?
Rochefort.
Rochefort. I
I think we said it 3 different ways there.
I said Rochefort, which I think
I think
it
it's
is.
Rochefort.
we'll go with that.
I've heard that before. I'm not just making it up.
Roquefort.
I personally like Cherbourg more, even if the other one is more fun. And an interesting homage to musicals before that one. It's bullshit to me that Rochefort lost best score to Oliver. Meanwhile, Cherbourg wins nothing.
Cherbourg wins nothing.
Cherbourg wins nothing.
It's
Except
simply
the Palme
nonsense.
d'Or, which is why we talked about it.
That's true.
This is an interesting crossover. Elvira here is connecting our 2 Quest shows, of course,
Yeah.
because we have reviewed Oliver.
Probably without knowing it, to be honest.
And we didn't really like Oliver.
No, we didn't much care for it. I'd venture so far as to say that we liked The Umbrellas of Cherbourg more than Oliver.
I would agree.
I will.
Oliver.
2 times, 3 times, maybe even 4 times more.
My goodness. How many degrees of magnitude are we getting separated from Oliver?
I will say I'm interested in this recommendation here from Elvira because I really like Umbrellas of Cherbourg, and that's the only Jacques Demy film I've seen. So maybe I'll add this one to the list. Thank you for the recommendation.
There you go. Bada bing, bada boom.
If you have recommendations for movies outside our canon, drop them in the comment, things that relate.
And then
What do you know? We don't just watch the movies for Quest. We also have pleasure time in which we watch movies that we choose.
I was watching Jumper last night.
Doug Lyman's Jumper.
That didn't go to the Cannes Film Festival.
No, yeah. I mean, I don't think it did.
No,
Yeah.
why would it have?
But that has a PS2 game. The White Ribbon does not.
That's true. That's true.
It in the right time period,
have.
but it doesn't.
Hayden Christensen could jump back to the
All
time
right,
of the White Ribbon.
let's just stop.
All right, no. This is the first and only time people will talk about Doug Lyman's Jumper and Michael Haneke's The White Ribbon in conjunction.
Yeah, we
with
gotta
one another.
take advantage of this.
Isn't it
We have to savor
historic?
it. Tanner,
You're the one who
will
brought it
you do us the favor of talking about the plot and conceit of this historic
Okay,
film?
yeah, absolutely. I can do that for you, Timo. So, The White Ribbon is a film, as you've said a number of times, Timo. It takes place in the early 20th century, I believe exactly 1914, in a northern German village. It is the story of the villagers and the townsfolk, and most notably their children, that takes place over a few months in this film, effectively. They are wrapping up a harvest at the beginning of the film. They are sort of preparing for winter. Things seem to be going all hunky-dory, except some interesting and tragic events begin to befall the people of the village. A doctor is sort of riding his horse and is tripped up by a wire, and he has to be hospitalized for several weeks or months. A couple of children, including the son of a very wealthy land baron, is beaten and left in the woods. And as we come to learn our characters more, there's a priest, a school teacher, a doctor, like I mentioned before, the baron, some stewards, some farmers. We come to learn that perhaps there is some darkness on the edges of this village, in the family lives and the personal lives of all these folks. Some fucked up things are happening in this village in northern
bluntly.
Germany. Yes.
Speak for yourself.
I will. And as the film wraps up, we begin to. It's sort of a mystery operated, like who is doing these things, who tripped up the doctor, who is beating the children, who is doing all these things. It comes out that perhaps it is the children themselves who are so much of a focus of the film and of the adults' attention that are in fact doing these things. The school teacher posits this theory and is sort of shunned off by the reverend who he posits this theory to. And he just kind of goes on his merry way. And then also World War One starts, kind of overshadows things. And then the movie ends on a very slow fade to black.
Yeah.
So
And
I'm
a
sure we'll
similar
talk about.
fade as it opens.
Yes, true.
Sure.
I'm sure we'll talk about all of the complexities of the relationships and what this could possibly mean, as we love to do here on the Quest for the Bestest.
Oh, and
So,
we love to do it.
We'd like
Anybody
to crack it open.
want to give their thoughts?
I'd love to give, I guess, kind of my lack of thoughts
Oh.
here, because this is a film that kind of has helped me crystallize what I don't find particularly engaging about this sort of slower foreign cinema. And I think it's because this film feels so complex in terms of its screenplay and the presences of its characters, but not in a way that I found engaging. I guess more in a way I found confusing. This is a very slow film, but there's still a lot going on. There are a lot of characters, and I think from that regard, it felt very overwhelming to me. We're operating in a small village. We're operating in a small community, but a big enough community where there's enough characters where it can be a little bit confusing who's who and who's what's relationship and who knows what and given what scenario. But this is more of a slice of life, but like a slice of really shitty life. And
Yeah.
it's just like, oh, this is a slice of like 30 people's lives, and none of them are having a great time right now. And I thought that it was competently made, and there was a couple of good scenes, but narratively, I didn't find it fulfilling at all because there was just so much happening that I didn't feel like the film was able to focus in on any one relationship other than the school teacher and his future wife. That I think is really the only part of that movie. That's a movie that feels like there's some sort of like true through line. But otherwise, it feels like everything else is kind of underbaked because there's so many characters and so many relationships and things happening that no particular element, character, or dynamic gets enough development for me to feel like this is narratively satisfying.
Abram, what did you think?
I really liked it a lot. It's interesting because the film obviously works very hard to be ambiguous, to your point. I mean, it very, very intentionally gives you no satisfaction in its payoff. And it led me to do a very, very, very cursory amount of reading about the film, although I tend to avoid that for the sake
Headlines. Couple headlines.
it was the Wikipedia page, which is why I say cursory.
Yes.
I tend to not want to do that so I can sort of share my thoughts as I'm figuring them out on Quest, and I still will have to do that because, to your point, Tucker, there is so much going on here.
Yeah.
But I think that the difference in how we view the movie is that because we move so slowly, and because I think there's a lot of very deliberate editing choices that help us out and clue us into what's going on. I found myself quite captivated by all the characters and the larger sort of scenario that we're unpacking. It is a mystery film, but it's also not. It doesn't operate with the traditional sorts of tension and ratcheting tension we'd expect out of a film like that, in that genre. But nonetheless, I really enjoyed it a lot. I thought it was beautifully shot. I thought it was effectively edited. And I think that there's a lot for us to sort of dig into as we reach our own conclusions about what actually happened.
Abram, you used a word that I think is a really good one, captivating, because that's how I really felt while watching this film. I think like my intellectual response is actually a lot more similar to Tucker's in that I thought it was kind of too slow, kind of ponderous, unsatisfactory. But at the same time, I was really intently watching the whole time and bored? Never. That like the mystery element of the film was dragging me along, and
Hotel Trivago.
and this subtitle, which isn't really in English, right? But the German one, Eine deutsche Kindergeschichte, which is like a German
Hey, you
children's
got
tale.
it. 302. Attempt 302.
Yes.
There we go, boys.
Yes. A German's children's tale right off the bat is cluing me into there's something up with these kids, and I kind of know that there's of our time period, and so I'm interested in like the social context of this film a lot, and I think that's where most of my like reading of it comes from in the meat, and I think there is something really interesting being said here, but I think it's just a little too nebulous for my taste as a thematic enjoyer, right? I want something just a bit more concrete than what this film is presenting. But I really did love the cinematography. I really did like the acting. There's a really wonderful child actors in this, and the school teacher is a really good actor. And so I think there's a lot to like here, but it was just a little too ponderous for me. It was a little less than satisfactory in terms of like what I want to get out of it, what I want to feel on like an immediate as that final shot is fading out, like what do I want to get from the movie. Just left a little bit to be desired.
Sure. My overbearing thought is how interesting it is that we're watching this and reviewing this the week after we do the Tin Drum.
Yeah.
Because I think that Haneke is playing in a lot of the same thematic landscapes that film is.
The same landscapes.
Yeah, well, yes, the same physical landscapes, same
Yes.
thematic landscapes, same focus on particularly child characters as embodiments of perhaps the political and societal sort of transformations in Germany at that time. But I think it's a bit more far-reaching than
Different World War, though.
different World War.
Yeah.
But as well, to play a card early, I'll say that I think it's pretty evident that like the age of the children pretty much lines up with like they will be young adults by the time that World
sure.
War II rolls around.
Yeah.
They will perhaps be being recruited into the Nazi SS or become Nazis or belong to that ideology themselves at the very least, or maybe not. I don't pertain to know these children too much, but they do seem pretty fucked up if I do say so.
They do.
Anyway,
One of them even touches himself inappropriately.
That's true. That's
messed
just,
up, and I'd never think about doing that.
That's true. God, dear viewer, I have to confess, we do have to tie Tucker to his bed with ropes every night.
No.
And I want to talk about all that. But more broadly speaking, I think that Haneke is doing something with a broader reach than was done in the Tin Drum, directed by a man whose name escapes me right now. I don't really remember. I'm sorry.
Harder to say than Geschichte.
Harder to say than sure. But yeah, in that context, I guess what I'm saying is I enjoyed this film more than the Tin Drum on a broader level. I think that the satirical elements of the Tin Drum engaged me more, but here I think Haneke is doing something a lot more methodical, a lot more deliberate. That I think is a word that we've thrown out a couple times. So yeah, had a interesting and intellectual time with the White Ribbon.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is more the straight dramatic version that the Tin Drum, where Tin Drum went satirical and was able to be a little bit more surrealist. This is very much the grounded, straight down the line dramatic version. And I think that might be why I found it, especially in back-to-back week comparison, a little bit less interesting than the Tin Drum, where that movie was surrealist and that maybe pushed me away from it a little bit, but certainly gave me something interesting filmmaking-wise to chew on. And I'm not saying this is a poorly made film. I actually think the cinematography might be the strongest element, in my opinion, where I might have found some of the character work or thematics and pacing to be a little bit pondery and floundery. I was constantly wowed by the cinematography and especially the blocking and framing, because there are like in any given shot there's usually 5 to 7 people and they're almost always framed with heads between shoulders and perfectly laid into the backdrop. And there's this one shot that I remember that is really, really interesting in that it is really just it would be a 2 shot if there were only 2 people, but there are 3 people in this shot. It's like sort of from the waist up. It's a shot of a mother and a daughter talking to a policeman about where did the wire go that the doctor tripped over. And it's framed in the way that the policeman is standing behind some drooping tree leaves, and there's a tree trunk about 3/4 of the way to the right of the frame. And that shot just stuck with me
Mhm.
of it framing wise is very, very normal.
Mhm.
And it would just be a totally normal shot. I would never thought of if the police officer was not behind the leaves, but because he's behind the leaves, and because there's this massive tree trunk right, like partially through the frame, it keyed me into the fact that there's real skilled blocking going on here of playing with depth of field and playing with foreground and background and things. So before I probably for the most of this review express a lot of dissatisfaction with a lot of elements of this film, the cinematography, blocking, framing, all of that stuff, I want to very categorically praise at the beginning because
Michael
I
Haneke,
want to.
the
I just want
director.
to. Yeah. I want
He's
to
very
parrot that
skilled.
because I thought to myself, like right at the beginning, like, wow, how refreshing. This shots feel so modern. The black and white with like the modern sensibilities. You know, we've got plenty of steady cam shots, plenty of stuff that's like just not possible in these older movies that we've been watching. I just found that so refreshing and so many honestly ballsy choices. Many doors being closed and children being abused on the other side that we
Mhm.
hear. But those are, I mean, that's kind of goes along that Billy Wilder quote of, you know, some directors could do more with a closed door than others could do with a full noodle frontal scene these days, right?
Mhm.
That the not showingness of this film is, I think, what it's really trying to, it's really not wanting to show you incidents, but really show you reactions and consequences of these very many incidents. It does sprinkle them throughout, but I agree. The cinematography was very outstanding, and the sound design was pretty damn good too. I think it was pretty like serviceable is not the right word, but just like fits right in. It's a puzzle piece. It just goes in perfectly, and it kind of melts away, and was nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think it dovetails nicely with the point I was making earlier about the editing, because I think about the moment you're talking about when Martin and his siblings are all being beaten by their pastor father, and it's not just that we're hearing these abuses through a door. It's that it's this really intriguingly framed shot that we linger on for a long
Yeah.
time.
We watch them enter the door, and you know full well what's going to
Yeah.
happen, and so it's just playing with you by having
We
you
watch a
sit
kid
there and
exit
watch.
and then re-enter, and then
Yeah,
close it again.
he has to
Yeah.
go get a switch
Get his switch. Yeah.
from a different room.
And it's interesting to me that we sit on shots for so long. I think that that's very affecting, not just in that moment, but another one I think about that I really like is the shot of the midwife after she's ostensibly committed suicide, and she's taken out in the coffin after she has a
Oh, yeah,
conversation
that's a long take.
with the doctor, and we simply see this sort of moment of mourning where we have the horse and the coffin framed in front of the barn, and we just sit on that shot for what I would say is probably 30 seconds. And I think that it's a sort of testament to the strength of the images that we even attempt to do that.
Mhm.
And at the same time, I think it takes an incredibly skilled editor to say, okay, we're going to sit here for a while, but we're going to sit here for the, in my opinion, right while, and let you sort of drink in what's happening. But as you were saying, Timo, also sort of absorb the subtext of the scene and absorb what it means to cut from where we were to where we are. I think there's a lot very quietly happening to make this film really, really, really work.
Yeah, reminiscent, of course, of and indicative of Haneke's style, which we can speak to on the show because we reviewed his film Amour from only a couple of years later.
Yeah.
What was
Crazy turnaround.
Yeah.
2012, I think.
Yeah, 2009 to 2012.
Yeah.
His wins here.
I wonder if that's the closest
Gotta
a
be.
director has won Palme d'Or twice.
100% gotta be.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there I remember us talking about, of course, that film being about an elderly couple in their flat, their chateau in Paris, and those shots of just the old man sort of slowly shuffling about the house, trying to get from one room to the next, or his wife doing the same thing after she's had her stroke. The very deliberate, painstakingly time-consuming time that it takes them to get from point A to point B. And I think he does a somewhat similar thing with the long takes here, showing us what can be quite desolate, or the exact moment, the depressive moment that these characters have to live in their day-to-day lives. in this very rural, remote village in northern Germany.
I think the setting really does have a key role to play in like a juxtaposition of this film, wherein you have this bucolic, like these flowing fields of wheat and the peasants harvesting them, and then eventually winter comes and just the snow blankets the landscape, and it's beautiful and it's shot very beautifully. And that, of course, is juxtaposed against the extremely dark underbelly that is running throughout this village, that the film is really what is really about and trying to dissect is what that means for German society. And so I think this like black and white is a good, if you want to be like, we are juxtaposing things, black and white's good. And then to have a really pretty location that your whole film takes place in. And I would be surprised if they shot any of this in a studio, because many times does a character like inside their beautiful little 19th century German building go to a window and you just can see outside the window and there's stuff going on outside there. And that's a low-key, really expensive way to shoot movies. So props to them for that.
Yeah, and also talking about the black and white and contrasting, this film also likes to use very strong contrast between light and dark, which is another element that makes the cinematography really stand out and the visual design, in that there are a couple of scenes that take place at night where it's just a candle lighting the scene. Of course, probably a couple of key lights, but sometimes not at all. And the room is entirely dark until a door or a window is opened or a candle is lit. And there are a couple of other moments, and these really, really, like, they're visually assaulting in the bloom, the light, the level of exposure on just an outside shot where everything is just some shade of white on an outdoor shot. And I found those to be really, really interesting in that it is almost surrealist in that sort of imagery where that's not what the world looked like, but the black and white and the level of exposure they're using makes this just an almost entirely white frame that just blasts your eyes, because usually they put it right after like an indoor shot.
It's very stark in its presentation. Tuggy, you mentioned a shot that you really enjoyed earlier. One that really jumped out to me and one that sticks with me is more of exactly what you're talking about. It is a moment where the school teacher is doing some work at home alone at his desk, and it's only illuminated by this one little oil lamp on his thing. And then we cut to, here's a knock at the door. It is Ava. He's sort of the young girl that he is interested in, and she's at the door. And so we do this cut to, we see him at the far right edge of the frame, and then the door is barely illuminated, and then it just stretches on into blackness, and it looks like it goes on forever. So, and I'm like, there's something scary about this shot. There's something ominous about it. And then the door opens, and then Ava pokes her head in, and her head is juxtaposed against that like almost infinite abyss of blackness. I'm like, there's something scary about this. I think Haneke is pretty clearly trying to play with these, these almost scary elements, horror elements, perhaps. Presenting them obviously in not in a heightened fashion, but in a very real fashion, where all of the harm that comes to people is very real, inflicted upon them by just everyday people that they live with, which is interesting. I think gets to a point that he's trying to make here.
Yeah. Shall we? Any more to say about the visual style of this film, or shall we dive into the dark underbelly of its story?
I got one more shot.
I also have one
that I really liked.
We don't usually do this. I think we should do this more. Like, what was your favorite shot in the movie?
Yeah.
It's the shot of the barn on fire.
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
That's water and the guy's pumping. Man, great shot.
It's a really exceptional shot because we're talking about...
The barn is massive.
Yeah, we're talking about sort of the role of deep blacks sort of swallowing a scene, but I think that the bright white of the fire does the same here too. And it's amazing sort of the level of fidelity you can make out in that fire, even though you would think that it'd be largely obscured. That's just a really, really, really crazy level of filmmaking. I'm not exactly sure how they parsed that detail out of that barn as it's engulfed in...
Yeah, because you can see the splits between the boards, and that's what's really impressive about that shot.
I think digital filmmaking helps with this. You get a bit more dynamic range out of a digital stock than out of a film one. So,
speaking of digital, this is the last thing I wanted to bring up with the visuals of the film. Is what feels almost incongruous in a Michael Haneke Palme d'Or winning film, which is one of the very opening shots of this uses a heavy CGI visual effect, which is the the doctor like toppling off of his horse or whatever. Like
It's the opening shot.
It's the opening shot.
Like we spend forever fading up after the credits, and then he rides in and boom, gets knocked off all in one.
Yeah. It's not a criticism, but it's just like sticks out. He's like, whoa, all right, because he moves. It moves in a fashion because you're not expecting this. It opens with this slow and elderly man, the school teacher, as we come to learn, sort of narrating. He's like, oh, this is kind of how I remember, but it might not be like this. It all started when this doctor rode into town. And then he flies off of his horse, and the horse tumbles, and he flies off there. You're like, Jesus Christ! Well, all right, we're starting on a very interesting foot here. And also interesting because Haneke is not a director that often uses CGI models in his films.
I didn't pick up on it. I didn't notice it was CGI. I guess it
didn't
makes
notice
complete
either.
sense that it was, because they wouldn't use a real horse. But
Yeah, they're not
I
going
didn't
to
really
throw an actor off
conceptualize
of a horse for real. It's not a criticism. I'm not saying like, well, this movie has bad CGI.
Well, it's a really interesting opening to the film.
Yeah.
Because, we just start with this not only act of violence, but a very strange one.
Mhm.
There's a tripwire set up to trip a horse.
And you don't see the tripwire either. You just see
No.
the horse sort of like fall.
Yeah, and I find that to be one of the reasons why I was so compelled as a viewer, because if that's sort of the starting point,
Mm-hmm.
I think it invites you into this sort of in some ways illogical world, which is what I like. There's a lot of sort of the scissors down the bird Pepsi's
Yes.
throat.
No, Peeps.
Pepsi.
Yeah, I was calling him Pepsi
Well,
last
we
night.
can call him Pepsi. Who
No,
cares?
Pepsi.
Okay, all right, yeah. From now on, every time we talk about the bird, a L tier character in this movie with 40 million characters,
Character.
every time we talk about him, we'll call him Pepsi. Okay,
Okay,
guys?
that's
Everyone shake a
Second
hand.
billing bird in the movie.
Wow.
I just think that the stark and stylized violence of the film gives it a tenor that, to me, kind of moves it out of the space of just more
Mhm.
traditional historical drama.
Mm.
Well, the way in which it shows violence is there's kind of this air of violence surrounding all the characters. All the characters are very worried about the violent acts, but I think we get to see it 3 times. There's the first shot, the bird, and then when Carly, the disabled boy, is mutilated, we see that in its
damage,
grotesqueness.
yeah.
But the other times we don't see Siggy, the Baron's kid, when he's beaten and hung in the woods.
No.
We see him thrown into the river in like a little,
Yeah.
like a children's fit. But and he looks like he's dead, but he really isn't.
Yeah, he just like is laying flat in the river. He's like, geez, so they kill this kid immediately by throwing him in there? No, he was just playing.
He's allergic to
possum.
water, man. He's
Yeah.
allergic to water.
There's
So
also
the way that like the violence is backgrounded, except in these moments where it needs to be shown, I find is effective too.
there's also just something compelling about like when Georg
Yes.
Yeah, Georg.
George.
is
George Pepsi.
just beating the life out of his son.
Yeah.
We see the strikes to an extent, but then he's being kicked on the ground out of shot.
Oh, that's right,
We're
yeah.
watching almost waist up of Georg as he's beating his son. And I mean, there's obviously a tension between repression and expression.
Mhm.
Well, this is just a German thing, man. These here Protestant Germans,
Mhm.
they're either extraordinarily repressed or they're lashing out, and that is the mental state that all of these characters operate in, and then the society that they're in has created this very toxic, like emotional culture around all of
Mhm.
them.
And also a culture that is obsessed with purity to get exactly to the visual metaphor that is the title of this film, The White Ribbon.
Yeah.
Obviously, the Reverend is one of these characters that pushes this sort of religious repression in the name of having his children be pure, good of heart, good Christians, etc., etc.
Well, and there
he is
a little socio-political or religious context is there in northern Germany, which is extremely Protestant. So you
Mhm.
can't really be thinking in big Christian realms, but you got to really zone in on like a Lutheranism, a pretty doctrinal form of
Yes,
religion,
I
which
mean,
ultimately
they-
is important for the understanding of this movie, is like how religion is operating in this town.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, a big sticking point of his is like, my children, your confirmation is coming up. How can you be, present yourself before God and the church if you're still committing these acts of if you're being naughty little school children, if he's not really understanding the full capacity to which they are acting.
In which
so
they are being naughty.
in which they are being naughty, and by that I mean committing horrible assaults on other children and adults, for that matter. But yeah, I mean, his children are, and here we get into like, okay, the character names here. His children are Martin and the girl's name is escaping me right now.
IMDb, save us.
Yeah.
Are you going to parse through all the children to remember which one it is?
I remember what they look like.
Martin et al.
Yes,
Yeah.
Martin et al.
His two children have the white ribbon.
I mean, if they were being tried, that's what it would be.
Yes. Wrapped around their arms or in their hair or what have you, as a reminder to them. It's like, hey, you have to remember to be pure. This is a punishment as much as it is a reminder for you. And in many ways, it seems that it does the opposite. Like, it builds resentment towards their father, and it sort of maybe encourages them to beat up. I guess after they get the ribbon would be when they beat up Carly.
Again, if we're taking that as being the case.
Exactly. I am operating under the assumption that the school teacher is correct, that the children are the ones doing these things.
Yeah. Because that's an interesting thing about the mystery of this movie. And I think that might be maybe where we should start. The thematic and story of this film is talking about the fact that this movie ultimately is a whodunit in a sort of way, and not in the traditional methodical sense where there is a clear answer and clues. I imagine there are, probably for rewatches and for the more analytical at heart, enough clues to parse out what the truth is, or maybe not. I have no idea. But the fact that this movie presents a almost in what you're talking about, a horror movie sort of way, like a trail of bodies, a slasher sort of thing, where violent acts are happening largely off screen, as you mentioned, Timo, and it's unclear who the perpetrator is. And the film is both entirely about that, but also a lot of times seems totally unconcerned with that, because this movie spans a long period of time, and it's sometimes unclear like how long time has passed in between things, but the mystery and the element of what part of our culture, or more specifically who is causing people to be hurt, cause these things to happen, is the central narrative thrust of the film. But I think that a big part of why I felt this film lacked focus is that I do think it strays away from covering that topic for such large periods of time, that I almost kept forgetting that was kind of what this movie is about, like in the background. The whodunit aspect. In that a lot of all the characters are worried or not worried to some degree about the act of violence happening around the town. That is the thrust of this film, is a small town and lots of violent acts happening. How do different people feel about that, react, internalize it, treat other people because of it, and that is very interesting. But a lot of this movie is also just people talking to one another about all sorts of different elements of their life, and so they get into work, they get into the legal, they get into the religious, they get into the power structures and things like that. And I like that this movie attempts to be all encompassing for covering every element of the cultural strife in this village, but the narrative of the fact that these violent things are happening and we don't know who's causing it really only seems to rear its head every once in a while, in a way where it almost doesn't feel realistic to me, of if this were really happening and you didn't know who was doing it and it kept happening, you feel like people would care a lot more about it.
Well, here's my thing about that, though. As you say, it happens a number of times. It happens 3 times. And the first time with the doctor, they're like, well, that was odd, but, there's the wire, and then the wire disappeared. And then it's really after Ziggy has been beaten and left tied up in the woods, that they're like, okay, we got to get to the bottom of this. And they think that they do. Basically, they think that it's this farmer and his child Max, because
I guess that's true.
They think it's an act of revenge on behalf of this family.
Because that is the family with the mother that is moved to the sawmill and then falls through the floorboards and dies.
Correct.
And that child of that family, the oldest one apparently, at least I picked up on that, is goes
The
out.
cabbage slasher.
Yeah,
He's the cabbage
the
slasher
cabbage slasher.
with his scythe, and so that's like that's another type of an act of violence.
True,
Like, 'cause
that's
I
true.
think
I
there
did forget
are
about that one.
kind of maybe two categories of violence here, like an interpersonal violence and like an economic violence from the Baron, because I think that one thematic area that is like a little disconnected from the like main thrust of the film, but is very important, is this kind of like old dying world that is breathing its last final breath. Because when World War I comes, the world changes so much that this society that they are living in is never going to go back to this or even look remotely like how it is again. And so the like ways that the Baron is a character in and like controls so much of the town and the political
Yeah.
situation of that seems to be like yet another category and yet another instigator for the violence in between people in the town.
Yeah.
The Baron is interesting to me because he's in some ways quite ineffectual.
Mm-hmm.
Because
He's not around.
He's not around.
Yeah, he beelines out of town after his kid gets beat up, which is understandable.
No, his wife does.
No, he stays. That's right. His
It
wife
kinda
leaves
comes to
with
shut
Ziggy.
it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they all leave and then they come back and she wants to leave again, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
The wife and the kids leave. He stays behind.
Yeah,
and
because
basically
she
comes to
had
shut it
she
the
had
whole
that
time.
affair
Yeah.
with the guy in Italy.
Well, that's part of the point I wanted to make. I was
Okay.
a little confused on that plot point. But essentially, the Baron gets Max, but then releases him.
uh-huh.
He brings the police.
Max is the cabbage slasher.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
just
The
clarify.
cabbage slasher.
He brings the.
Timo, insert sound effects. Thank you.
He brings the police in after Carly is assaulted and is unable to reach a conclusion.
Yeah.
His wife finds another man who she loves more.
Mhm.
The Baron has this sort of grandfathered in importance and power over the town, but it's actually really the characters of the pastor and the doctor who we see exert the most pressure on our characters directly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think
That's a
that
really good point.
that's interesting. And even within them, there's a very, very, very interesting edit between the pastor talking to Martin about how he needs to stop jerking
Yes,
off.
exactly. To the doctor having sex with who is his new wife? Correct.
No.
This
No.
woman. Yeah,
She's
it was
Just
like
sleeping
caretaker.
together. Yeah.
okay.
She's like a
She's the-
housekeeper.
She's the midwife.
Well, because
Yeah.
because my confusion there was it is understood that Carly is the doctor's son by the townspeople,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
And his wife has died, and she is taken care of.
Oh, okay.
She's like a live-in caretaker.
I was-
for
I-
Carly.
I guess I
since
was-
his wife passed away.
I
a
was
while ago.
confused on the fact that
I
the
thought
caretaker,
Carly's
the
was this child of the midwife.
Mm-mm.
no, yeah,
No.
well, she calls herself his mother.
Yeah, because she ostensibly she's a
Well,
caretaker.
that's not
Okay.
what they said at the end of the film. They say that the townspeople think that what happened is the doctor got pregnant with the midwife. They had tried to abort the baby.
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
right.
And then Carly was born as
Yeah.
Carly is.
And they also say, this is a rumor. This is the kind of the rumor mill spitting this out. How far does that go to be true?
In the actual conversation between the midwife and the doctor, when he is brutally verbally abusing her,
That's,
Yes.
that's a
More
epic
forms
rap
of
battle of
violence.
history.
Uh-huh.
yeah, he's they're talking about their past sort of relationship when his wife was still alive.
Exactly.
He was still cheating on his wife with her.
Yeah.
So they've been intertwined
And,
for a while.
and he mentions that he never found her attractive. He was always
Yeah.
repulsive, even though that was the case.
But to kind of come out of the rabbit hole for a
There we
second,
go.
the effect of that cut, it goes back to what I was mentioning before about the repression or the, as you're saying, Timo, the lashing out. The two forces that exert the most power, we have this beautiful cut that perfectly illustrates the ideological differences
Mhm.
between them. It's interesting to me that they are the ones that are the most domineering in the narrative, and the Baron is sort of in the background, if anything.
Yeah.
Mhm.
He is quite
Yeah.
ineffectual. I think it's interesting that you point that out, Abram, because I think we really get a sense of that. How he does not really have a clear grasp on orders of importance in his own life or the people of the village. Towards the end, when his wife is coming clean to him about, "Hey, I had this affair in Italy. I'm leaving you for this man," and also here is overarching everything that is wrong with this village, why this place is fucked up, and why we should leave. And then she's done giving her whole long tirade, and he's like, so wait, did you like cheat on me? Like actually, and like that's the part that he's focused on, not like how she just perfectly diagnosed the sickness of this village. He's like, well, did you fuck that other guy or no?
And to tag that really quickly, one of the words she uses, which captures, I think, why so much of the narrative is not focused on the murders itself. She says that there's a lot of apathy in the town.
Oh, sure.
And that sort of apathetic worldview is 100% characteristic of how most people in the film are operating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Part of me thinks in terms of like the sexual dynamics of the film and the way that the different men are in control or completely not in control. The school teacher is basically told by Ava's father of how their relationship is going to work, and he just acquiesces to that. The Baron is cheated upon, or his wife cheats on him, and that's all then he can care about. I think there's kind of like a sexual ineptitude of the men in this film that my knowledge and context of like the world leading up to World War I was kind of a current and a theme, especially in these Protestant German areas where it was just so not the thing to talk about sex at all. And so the way that then totally fucks up everybody's minds about it is displayed in this film, I think through like they're like so self-conscious about it, but they're so terrible to each other as a result of it. It's a very interesting dynamic. And I do think it leads into World War I, but I'm still not exactly quite sure how.
You
it
mean
does
thematically?
Or do you think
it causes it? Okay.
No, I think it does cause it, but it's more closely thematically linked.
I mean, around this time is also, it's like first wave feminism, which is more of an American thing, obviously, with women's suffrage and whatnot, is around the same time period.
Yeah, it's a couple. I mean, it's getting boiling. It's kind of the pot is being stirred. It's 1919 in the States where suffrage comes in.
That's right. I thought it was earlier than that. Anyway,
tisk.
Sorry.
I am a little bit curious about what you were just mentioning, the ways in which the political ideas that were covered in World War I that caused World War I are attached to this movie because, and I'm interested in both your analysis as probably the most informed about both German and war history out of the four of us, and then Tanner, who has presumably also done a little bit of research about this film, and then you did a little bit of that too. So really, I want help from all three of you, the Holy Trinity, as I call you, to help me parse out a little bit of where this film's characters, narrative, and themes tie into World War I to make that if you find it a dominant enough part of this film to really like consider weighing heavily on it, because for me, I think another element that felt a little bit less focused than I was expecting this film is that World War I is not only this village remote, they don't really know too much about it. It's not nothing about war or the political themes were referenced until maybe 75% of the way through. But it isn't until like the last shots of the film where it's like, oh, and also World War I is happening. Right. And so I was pretty surprised, given like I guess the log line of this film is like on the eve of World War I. I'm like, could have fooled me.
So Timo, if I can throw something out here,
I want to hear what you
and then you can fact check me.
Okay.
So I think that this film is much more concerned with, and Haneke himself is much more concerned with the effects of, the morals of the town as a microcosm for the entirety of Germany or human society, if you want to extrapolate it that much.
Whoa.
Yeah. On World War II, much more than World War I, because World War I was really a set of like political dominoes that fell over. The general populace of Europe did not really play a factor into what caused World War I. It was a complex web of like political alliances and treaties and whatnot. They're like, well, because this happened, then I guess these 5 European powerhouses have to jump in the war because one guy was shot in a completely separate country.
What's your word? World War I is really about
That's
is world domination and imperialism.
That's 2 words. That's 1 word.
Imperialism is the big word in World War I because what's Germany want to do? Germany wants more markets to sell its goods to. Germany needs more colonies to extract resources from. that was kind of Germany's big impetus for getting into the war. The Kaiser's all about this. They had been building since 1870 when the country unified for the first time in its history under the Kaiser. But then there's a whole bunch of other imperial powers in the world who already have the markets and already have the colonies. And they're like, no, you can't take that. That's ours. Even though it's not. It's in Africa. It's the Africans.
Mhm.
The like that it's both the alliances and the like interconnected web, but it's also just like this lust for power and territory. They
Hmm.
just want more land. And the Europeans had been doing that against each other throughout the Napoleonic era. And they're like, well, it's time for another generational war. And so what I have been reading is that the
Their war alarm went off. Like, well, shit.
Gotta
Kinda-
do it.
you joke, but kind of yeah. And
Mhm.
everybody was pretty
Powder
much
keg of sorts.
ready to go to war and hyped about it by the time it rolled around in 1914.
Oh yeah, that's a fair point too.
The
Yeah.
Germans specifically, like expat Germans, almost done with the tangent, had a little thing they would call der Tag, the day, which referred to the day the war began, because that would be a great day.
Oh sure, like a far off concept is we're just waiting for the day.
Like Judgment
Waiting
Day.
for the
yeah,
day.
exactly.
but
yeah.
but awesome. Judgment Day,
Yeah.
parentheses, awesome.
But Judgment Day,
Parentheses, awesome.
parentheses, bullets and planes.
Be home by Christmas. Impossible. Challenge impossible.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, it's interesting that you talk about it being more of the cultural climate at the time, Tanner.
Mhm.
And I'm interested in hearing a little bit what you said
Sure.
about it being more World War II than World War One.
Absolutely.
Because hearing what you guys say, for me, I guess the movie may more be trying to say that it's this kind of cycle of senseless violence and apathy towards said senseless violence rather than cooperation that is what ends up causing wars and can cause the fact there are alliances and political ramifications that cause such a domino effect larger thing. This is, I guess, maybe this is what the movie is trying to say. These are like the seeds to where that is sown, like even between just a small community, isolated, and children.
Mhm.
Even in this level community, humanity has the propensity towards senseless violence and lack of cooperation and apathy towards violence that can then snowball and become something like World War One, where nobody is particularly passionate about one specific thing, but it becomes a giant all-encompassing war.
Yeah,
Is
I
that
actually
accurate?
I agree with you completely. I think that's
I
really
agree,
what this
yeah.
movie is trying to boil itself down to. Like, this is the type of society and the type of people that will A, go to war in World War I and 10 million men will die in the trenches, and then B, enable the Nazi rise to power. And the kids, I think you're really right, Tanner. Or was it you who said
yeah.
that
Yeah,
these
that's the point I wanted to make.
that these are like the Hitler youth of that like they're going to be the ones raising
Like the tin drum.
yeah, like being what's his name, the tin drummer's father, that kind of whole situation.
Yes.
So I do think that that's kind of like the core thematic idea, but I also am like, I don't know, that's still kind of vague. It's still not as specific as I would really like it, given how crazy this situation is in real life. Like the real world political currents of this time are, I think, like actually much more interesting than what this film is saying.
Sure, and I think it's a matter of Haneke making this film in 2009 and not 1979 like the Tin Drum, where he's perhaps trying to make a broader point, less specific than, okay, these are the kids who become who like enable the Nazis in Germany in the 1930s. 15 years down the line, because I think that's really the timeline here is what Haneke's trying to emphasize a little bit. Is these kids are what 10, 11, 12 years old in 1914, and then you add 15 years onto that, they're like they are
Mid-late
the
20s.
Yeah, exactly. I think they are the age demographic that that Nazi Germany was really built on the back of. And here's 5 words for you, Tucker. Count me. All right. The sins of the father.
Correct.
Bang, got it. All right. I mean, they literally read a Bible verse to this effect that I'm a jealous God. I will exact, the sins of the father on the child, and so on and so forth. It really is like the cycles of violence, or how these parents, whether they be the doctor abusing his child, sexually abusing his daughter, or the reverend physically abusing and sort of turning a blind eye to the physical violence that his children may be inflicting, trying to invoke a puritanism in them, but instead he is sort of chastising them into being maybe greater sociopaths or psychopaths. It is all of this stuff that's like, these parents don't really understand what they're doing. They are just lighting a fire in their child that is boiling over with these acts of violence that they're inflicting on fellow children or adults or the cabbages or the barn or whatever. They are building an anger inside of them that is going to boil out at some point. Just like the adults in the village, their parents did the same thing. I think Haneke is really getting at these cycles of violence here, and we see how parents will be like, well, my kid is fine. My kid is perfect. It's okay, Mr. School Teacher. They are not committing these horrible deeds. But then, like, in private, at home, they'll be like, well, these kids are being naughty. I know how to fix that. I will beat them senselessly. That'll fix it.
Yeah.
To bring it back to the mystery for a second, really what I got out of my light reading was that there was a lot of sort of... critics at the time had a lot of disagreements over the effectiveness of the film ending with no real resolution.
Yeah.
And the challenges of trying to ascribe blame to the doctor, to the priest, to the baron. Where can you ascribe blame? What does the film actually support? Does the film support none of it? And I guess what I would suggest is, would it be wrong for me to say that what the film actually supports is that it's ultimately unimportant who literally beat Carly, because everybody is complicit in what happened.
Yeah.
I think that that's ultimately the answer to the mystery, which is
is a character.
The village in mass is at fault, and the German people, the German country at fault is en masse at fault for what happened.
And I don't think that that's a bad resolution. I don't think that that's a sort of Knives Out mystery, but it is a... I think it is
the White Ribbon's not a bad name for Knives
Brian
Out.
Johnson, take notes.
I think it is an intellectually complete answer,
sure,
in my opinion.
I actually think you're right about that, because something that I was thinking of while you guys were talking, my mind was just kind of like drifting off, like, what
That's
else
right.
can I...
You don't have to listen to us.
What else can I glean from this? And it is, when we're talking about the fact that one of you were mentioning the fact that they will go home and beat them senseless, and that being the kind of culture that normalizes acts of violence. Because what I found so interesting, especially about the pastor's family, is that it is, I think, very clearly implied that this is something that has happened many times before, in that they've got like a regimented system of how they're supposed to act in front of their parents, how they are supposed to, kiss his hand when dinner is over, and if you did this, you're not allowed to eat this night, and then you're going to be beat in front of your siblings, and it's going to be 10 lashes, and you complicitly go get the whip and then come back, and there is this whole thing of that I gather, especially out of that family dynamic, that this kind of just violence being if not an answer, the answer to all issues in this society, that this is the kind of culture that from the very inception of a child growing up and understanding the concept of violence, we actually see a scene, I think one of the best scenes in the movie, of when one of the kids learns what death is. That's not a scene about violence. I mean, in the way of death it is, but in that from a very young age, kids are taught that violence is the answer. I mean, if someone does something you don't like, even if you technically don't have proof that they did it, violence is the way in which you prevent that from happening again. But of course, us being a little bit more sociologically aware, it is understood that it is actually a cycle, and that perpetuates further violence. And so,
yeah. I mean, Tucker, what I wanted to say quickly.
I feel like I'm in sociology class.
You were talking about the sequence again where the Reverend says, "I'm going to beat you. Where you've done wrong. I'm going to hit you 10 times with this crop."
And all the kids are like, "Yes, sir. Okay."
What's interesting to me about that, and it really only jumped out to me when you were saying that, is that he says that, and he's like, "I'm going to do this tomorrow."
Yes,
so it's not
exactly.
like in the moment I am angry at you. Let me express my anger. Let me do this outburst. It is, well, this is you did something wrong. This is the punishment that comes with it.
Yeah.
And so we will inflict the punishment tomorrow.
Yeah.
And, so
and none of them are
right
surprised by it, which is why I say I think it's implied that this has happened before, because this is like, it's not like, I need to remind you or tell you for the first time, you go get the whip. Here's where it is. It's like, well, there's not even a word said. It's like, you know where the whip is, go get it,
Yeah.
and then we will do the beatings, and you will watch it happen. All
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is the systemized violence of the internal family, and then when the school teacher's like, "Hey, you think your kids might be like kind of fucked up and like beating up other children?" He's like, "I'm gonna fucking call the police on you, you asshole!
Yeah.
How dare you say something like that about my children?"
Doesn't he imply he's gonna kill him as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's intriguing because it sort of illustrates on behalf of the pastor, of whom could have his own Quest episode, I think,
Uh huh.
an inability to, or a sort of sense that if this were true about his children, it would be a failure of his own.
Yeah.
Because he's interested in this idea of mutual respect with his children. That's another thing he says in that scene.
Yeah.
The only way we can keep living with each other in this house is if I beat you, because we must uphold a mutual respect. And it's not only incredibly backwards, if you can believe it, but it's sort of the idea that his children would perpetuate
It was
these
made a long
crimes.
time ago. This movie was made a long time ago.
That's fair. It's been almost 15 years.
Golly, I can't even believe it.
It's sort of ideologically irreconcilable that everything he's done that he thinks in the name of good actually resulted in his children attacking a disabled child.
Mhm.
And it's interesting to pair that with this sort of throwaway bit of dialogue from the school teacher about how nobody thought that there was going to be a war in the town. You said war, you'd be laughed out of the room, and then suddenly the war had arrived.
Mhm.
I think it's sort of like a Little Domino, Big Domino movie. The Little Domino is that there is such a foundationally corrupt society, short-sighted and like morally interpersonally flawed,
Mhm.
that what happens when that little domino pushes over in the big domino is World War One.
Yeah.
Or any war. I think that there is a universality to the themes, as you're saying, Tanner.
Mhm.
Even watching the film through a modern lens, just the notion of apathy towards violence is not one that's in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that interestingly comes from, you say watching it through a modern lens, but I mean, this film is through a modern lens,
Yeah.
2009, not a long time ago. And I think that is what makes this film, even through the complexities and vast number of characters that contributed to me not feeling particularly engaged by it, what intellectually and artistically I found so fascinating about it is that it does feel like it's actually trying to recapture a lot of the visual stylings and aesthetic stylings and things of a film that was made in the let's say post World War II, about World War One. We've actually watched quite a few movies of that time period,
Yep.
about that time period for this show and for the previous iteration of Quest. In that you could frankly have convinced me that this was a 60s movie. It being in black and white obviously does help contribute sort of the mindset of this is old. Obviously, in reality, it was not production-wise. But I think that it being so many years later and decades removed from what we usually see topics like this covered does give it that more modern and critical lens looking back of, actually, here's where we can point out flaws. Here's where we can be cynical, because it's a very cynical movie.
Yeah, I mean, Haneke's a very
cynical director.
Yeah, he's
yes.
very nihilistic, is the word I
True.
would use.
Yeah. And I think that makes this film feel distinct because we're so used to watching movies that are made in the time period. It's like, okay, well, this is commenting on a time period that was more recent, and they hadn't had the time to learn from what the effects were going to be of something like this. And then we usually have to be like, okay, but from a modern lens, here's what still makes sense to us. Here's what does make sense. But this film, I think, because of it being made so much later, I found that very interesting. It's like, this doesn't feel like culturally as displaced as we usually feel like when we're watching a black and white movie about a European country on the eve or during or post World War One or
Tucker,
World War
be careful.
II.
You sound like a film TikTok poster making up a movie that they don't like or whatever.
Oh, I'm making up a movie that I've watched 20 of for this show.
Sure. Let's see.
I have a question for you guys.
Yeah.
We haven't really talked much about the school teacher. Where
Hey,
does he
Timo,
fit
great minds.
into your whole reading of this movie? Because A, he's the narrator, but B, his voice is old. He
Mhm.
says he's drafted at the end of the movie, and yet he has a role in everything to play, both in like raising the children, he's the teacher, but also in disciplining them and being disciplined by the reverend and the doctor, the two power holders in town. Where does he fit into this whole narrative? Because I'm actually a little unsure about like what his role is, other than the observer and note taker, almost.
I think he and his relationship with Ava are the grounding force of this film, because otherwise every other character is
A total
very
piece of
direct.
shit.
Is a total piece of shit and very directly involved with the cycle of violence we've been talking about. But Ava seems to be a very morally good person, and so does he. We never see him tell anyone to do anything bad, or he's actually the one that ends up like not just like allowing this to happen.
He's connecting the dots. He's the one who's like, I gotta tell someone about this.
Yeah.
He's the voice of reason, and he's effectively the voice of God as our narrator. At least an older version of him with a bit of context and perspective on this.
The older
At the same
thing-
time, he does say that like, well, I may not be remembering everything here. I'm recalling it as best I can.
I'm just note that because
he's recalling a lot.
Yeah.
He's recalling a lot about other people's personal lives that he never witnessed.
That's interesting.
His voice being so old in the narration seems to indicate he lived both through World War I and World War II.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so
Presumably involved in both of
perhaps
them.
he's come out on the other side of those traumatic experiences with kind of a different reading of what he saw unfold in this village than maybe is objective.
Yeah.
What? Wait,
One thing I did want to note
Could not be.
I see what you're saying.
is just something I jotted down, maybe because it stuck out to me as an odd line. And of course, we have to look at like all the relationships in this movie, the romantic ones, not necessarily the like parental ones, through the lens of it's the early 20th century. Adult men did marry like 16-year-old girls like that, as is the case with the school teacher and Ava. And he says that he admires her childishness, that she has this
Shy appeal.
She's very shy, but she's outspoken in a childlike way, something that he reiterates a number of times. Which I find interesting because he's saying that about this woman that this girl that he's romantically interested in, but doesn't really say that of any of the children who, by the end of the film, he is very wary of and very even scared of, potentially, of the prospect of them, hurting people severely. And so I think that just points more to the fact that he is like kind of our moral voice. He's the one that's pointing out like, hey, there's something wrong here with the village. He is protective at times, but also, I don't know, there's an innocence about him in a certain way, I guess.
He's
is
not
what I'm getting
infallible,
at.
though. He does mess up. The girl that tells him about the dream, he kind of coerces her to go talk to the police, which he had misgivings about, and he's probably right to have misgivings about that. The cops were not nice to her at all, and so, yeah, I agree with him being like the moral center of this film.
Yeah.
As close to a moral center as we can get in a Michael Haneke film, I guess I should say.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk a little bit about his role in the community, because I think that a little bit of a missed opportunity of this film is to show, I think, a more long-term him coming to this realization that the kids are, in his mind, and it seems through the lens of the film, the ones that are perpetrating this violence, because I feel like that element is pretty backloaded into the film, because we very rarely see him teaching the kids.
Right.
We actually very rarely see him directly interacting with kids.
Right.
There are a couple of moments, I think, especially earlier on, but for the bulk of the middle of the film, his narrative is much more about Ava than it is about him being a teacher interacting with the children that are then the ones causing this. And I think that from a narrative level, him being the grounding force, kind of he is the main character of this movie, as close to a main character as the film has. I think it's a little bit of a missed opportunity to show him teaching the children, watching them do a little bit more violent things, like coming to the realization that they have this ability in them to cause things like this. Because otherwise, he as a character it doesn't seem particularly concerned with a lot of things. He's usually concerned with how the violence has impacted others, and then how that has impacted Ava, then how that impacts him because he likes Ava. And so I found, like, it's not until like the last 20 minutes of this 2 hour and 40-minute long movie where he sees them like outside the window. He's like, that's weird. And then he kind of retroactively puts all the pieces together.
I think that's exactly what that is supposed to be, though.
Well, I understand that, but
the children are supposed to be a bit innocuous. You are not supposed to be like pointing fingers at them all along. Like they are, for a lot of it, I think you're supposed to be with the mind space of the townspeople. That like, well, the kids aren't doing it. They're kids, they're innocents. But the teachers, like, I guess they have been like weirdly present at the scene of all of these crimes, and because there's not like one in specific that he's like that kid is doing. Is like they're like operating as this weird mass of like this weird like amorphous blob of like just going around the town and doing crimes. So I think it is supposed to be this is a retroactive thing. Like right as he's leaving too, because he's leaving town like for good at that point, or he gets drafted. That's why he leaves, I suppose. But anyway. Yeah,
I think the reason I would disagree with that is I think that the element of the children being having something wrong with them, even if they are not the ones that are doing the crimes, because that's not 100% stated in the film. But I think that we all at least take away some assumption of that. That I think is the most interesting element of this movie, and also frankly because I was informed by the description of this film online that there is something wrong with these kids, I was keyed into the fact that this is a strong part of the narrative. I think the most interesting part of the narrative.
Right.
The kids are doing it. And so to have it take so long for any of the adult characters, particularly our main school teacher character, to come to that realization and then come to it very, very quickly, I found to be like a stumbling block of the pacing of this film. Of that mystery is very compelling. As I said, I do think that it's left in the background for a big chunk of the film, and especially I don't think that it's particularly satisfying or narratively interesting to have it like speed to a close as he just kind of puts pieces together. Like, oh, I guess they were doing that. It's like, well, you're the teacher. We don't see it, but presumably you've been interacting with them every day or almost every day for the like year plus that this movie's gone on for. We don't get a chance to ever see any of that. And as I said, I think it's a missed opportunity to have more interesting scenes and show that character that are into this world more closely interacting over the course of the runtime with the most narratively complex and interesting element of this film, that being the children's propensity for violence that he is largely disconnected from, even though in the world of the film, he shouldn't be.
Thoughts, Timo, Abram?
Abram, do you have any? I'm kind of running dry.
Well, I think about the moment when he's fishing in the river and he sees Martin walking across the bridge above him, and he's high enough up that he would die if he were to fall off the bridge. And it's interesting that, obviously the teacher knows him. They have a conversation wherein Martin talks about how I wanted to see if God was ready to kill me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I don't think I ever took it as a viewer as though he's sort of disconnected from the lives of the people. I think it's more so that for me, the film, as I mentioned before, I think the apathetic nature of the film is critical to the thematic point. And I like what Tanner's reading earlier about the sort of lining up the ages. The notion that this youth will become the Hitler youth is one that is quite powerful, but not one that you would see from an 8-year-old right away, right? Or 10 or 12. I think that the idea that the children operate as this sort of malign influence, but
and as
under
a mob,
the radar,
too, kind of.
Exactly. Yeah, like this amorphous shape going around the town committing crimes almost.
I think that's an important. I think that their ability to operate undetected is an important thematic element of the movie.
Yeah.
I also I wonder what the role of the teacher as that has to say about the cultural picture of the film, because we sort of have religion with obviously the pastor, what I think you can interpret as sciences or something to that extent with the doctor, and then the education with the school teacher. I mean, I think that these
politics with the Baron, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, these professions are picked very deliberately to make a larger social and cultural point, I would say.
Yeah.
And so the sort of the weakness of the education is another important element of the film.
Sure. Yeah, and I think I actually agree with that, and I think that I think would feel like a stronger thematic and narrative element of this film. But as I said, again, missed opportunity. We don't really see a lot of that. We see basically. I think there's one sequence of them in a classroom, and even then, it quickly shifts to being more of a religious thing. Because I think the pastor comes into, he's like a guest.
He's there to do divinity.
Yes,
Yeah.
he's
It's like
doing like
confirmation
their
school.
confirmation
But
classes.
to the point of education being weak, the role of this teacher, he could have been the one to maybe help steer them in the right direction so they aren't doing something like this, because he is, you say this, and I agree, the town is largely apathetic. He is certainly the most empathetic character of the film, because his entire role is to, in the film, is to worry about one of the more helpless characters of the film is in Ava, and not showing his interaction with the children, even to the point of, or to the goal of showing that the education system and his role in education is weak. We don't get a chance to even see it be weak. It's just, it's implied, I think.
I think the implication is the point, though. Is like, he is distracted for his entire presence in the film by this girl that he likes. Like,
Sure.
that is his entire role in the film, and he's the teacher, and you're like, well, you know, he should be perhaps be getting more involved with this children, with the case of these children. But he's not thinking about that. A, because like the rest of the townspeople, he doesn't consider the children to be suspects in this case. But B, because he's clearly far more concerned with like, oh, am I going to be able to marry this girl? Oh, she has to move away. How am I going to handle that?
Yeah.
I talked to her father. He says I can't marry her for a year. Than he is with like the lives of his students. For in any case,
Yeah.
so I think the implication is maybe some of the point there.
Mhm.
Sure, but I don't understand why that is better than showing a scene in what, because for me, film is show. It is about visualizing these elements, and I can imagine a scene very clearly of him being in the classroom and the kids are fighting, but he's too busy thinking about like, how am I going to do the bike or whatever it is that is more directly connected to his relationship with Ava, that is causing him to not be paying attention to the violence or the fact that the kids.
There is a scene where the kids are all fighting. It's when he and the Reverend come in at the same time.
No, true, yeah, but then the Reverend is much more the character that takes control of that sequence, and it shifts very quickly.
I think
to
the
religion.
thing is, I actually feel that scene works against your point, because I feel like if you're talking about the visuals, right, the visual storytelling of the kids being unruly in the classroom, and then the classroom being overtaken for this religious purpose,
Yeah.
I think is illustrative of the weakness of his position.
I mean, yeah, I would agree, but then that still doesn't give him much to do narratively in that situation.
Well, I think that's kind of the point. He's the control has been wrestled away from him in what we would consider to be his domain.
He's pretty much powerless.
No,
wherever he is
I
in
get
the
that, but
village.
presumably he's doing this 6 to 8 hours a day for most of the days of the film takes place, and we just never see any of it. I just think that that's a massive missed opportunity, and really takes me out of this character that I think is supposed to be the core of the film. And narratively, I wish he interacted with the most interesting element of the film.
Sure.
But we never see an opportunity for that to happen. And what it is, it's like, it's wrestled away. You can make it a thing of not showing it as actually implication. This film shows so much. It goes out of its way to introduce us to like 8 families across the village. And some of them have narratives that I kind of understand, and some of them I know who this person is and why they're with this younger person. But there's so much happening. But then the one character that I'm like, okay, I know that this character's the main character because he's the narrator, and it's his relationship with the girl is like maybe the most defined interpersonal dynamic of the film. But then I just think that he ends up feeling disconnected from like the plot of the film in an interesting way that I think you can say that maybe that's the point, but that still, I mean, it significantly made me like the movie less in terms of all the parts coming together cohesively, because I felt like there was just like an internal disconnection between this is like a 9-pillar movie in terms of, okay, we got this family here, we got this family here, and there's politics and religion, yada yada yada, and I just feel like it's also like the pillars are unevenly distributed, which is like, so the roof on top I feel like is kind of shaky.
I think our positions are clear. Should we give it a score?
Let's give it a score.
Okay.
What are the details of this Palme or
Timo,
the ceremony?
I'm so glad that you could ask. So, quite interesting. I want to get to at the end here, but quickly, this one came out in 2009. The 2009 Cannes Film Festival was headed up by the jury president this year was Isabelle Huppert, famous French actress. Also on the jury this year was Asia Argento, daughter of Dario Argento. James Gray, American filmmaker, director of Ad
Armageddon
Astra and Armageddon Time, and U.S. actress Robin Wright was on the jury this
There
year.
we go.
Other films in competition this year. So this is always a fun thing. I was like, the what if these films won. I think there's an interesting one here I want to get to. Lars von Trier's Antichrist. We talked about his Dance in the
Glad
Dark.
that didn't win.
Antichrist was in
I would
was in
watch
competition
that.
this year. Amongst the 20 films, 19 others in competition included Antichrist, Lars von Trier, Pedro Almodovar's Broken Embraces, Enter the Void by Gaspar Noé, A Vengeance by Johnny To, and most interestingly, I feel, Inglourious Bastards by Quentin Tarantino.
Interesting. Maybe given that, what is it, Pulp Fiction 1? They slotting that in?
But I just think interesting because I think if I can headcanon this a little bit, I would imagine that Michael Haneke fucking hates Inglourious Bastards.
Send him an email. Find his email and ask him.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Let's ask the score sheet what this movie is going to be ranked at. Are you ready?
Hang on, let me pull it up. Hang on. Everyone just vent. Everyone be normal. Everyone act natural. As this is happening. Everyone be normal. Okay, let's do it.
All right, 3, 2, 1.
Go.
Okay, the number. The number's being calculated. It is 7.3, which means there will be no tie. The point breakdown is as follows. Tucker gave it a 5.8. I gave it a 7.0. Tanner gave it a 7.8. And Abram gave it an 8.5. So that pretty much aligns exactly with how we talked about it at the beginning of the episode, doesn't it?
I'd say so.
Okay, for the ranking, 7.3 is going to bring us up to in between La Dolce Vita and The Dancer. And Dancer in the Dark dropped the at spot number 13 on the list.
Good stuff.
Amor, the other Michael Haneke movie, is got an 8.1 at spot number 9, just for your reference.
I see.
Sure.
Breaking into the top 10 there. All right. Okay, Michael Haneke, I see you. We're done with his filmography, unless he gets another one in there at some point in the next couple of years, of course.
Oh, we're rooting for you.
All righty. Shall we figure out what we're going to watch next?
I think
go
that's
for
great.
it.
That's a good plan.
Ooh, yeah.
Just
So
sing,
excited.
Tanner. Sing when
Break
you're
out
ready.
that wheel.
brother.
Okay. Mommy made mommy made me mash my M&Ms. Okay, sorry.
Just sing it.
It's all right. This is a long one already. Okay. Wheel, what's your deal? Give us a movie that makes us squeal. Is it on digital or is it on real? Wheel, what's your deal?
The number is 19. Can you see it there?
I can. Oh wait. You might be able to.
Hold on. Give me a minute.
Hold on.
I believe in it.
Enhancing. No, we still can't see it.
Okay,
It's
whatever.
fine.
It's 19. Take my word for it.
This
What
is
movie
interesting.
is that going to be on the list?
This film comes from the year of our Lord, 1956, and actually, ladies and gentlemen, we have a documentary.
Whoa.
Oh.
We have a documentary about the wonders of the ocean. A film
Oh.
Oh, dear.
starring only
Uh-oh.
one person, Jacques-Yves Cousteau.
Oh, I've heard of
I
Jacques
love this
Cousteau.
guy. I love
I'm
this
familiar
guy.
with this.
Jacques Cousteau, and directed by Louis Malle and Jacques Cousteau. This is The Silent World.
Oh, I
Whoa.
have heard about this movie. I didn't know this was on the list. I am
Gosh.
looking forward to it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Oh.
Cool. It's only 86 minutes.
Yeah.
Wow.
A short,
Jacques Cousteau talk about the ocean?
That's
I'm
right.
down.
Yeah,
And
talking about
I
the
was just-
world beneath the waves, the silent world.
I-
Although, if you know the properties of like sonar and stuff, it's not
Shut the
silent at
hell
all
up.
down there. But
Okay. But no, yeah, I just wanted to look here. This wasn't because this seems like to me it would be a double winner year, but no, this is the film of 39 in competition in 1956. They decided to
Wow.
give it to a underwater documentary from Jacques Cousteau.
Well,
That's how
this-
far that name goes in France at that time. I
Yeah.
think.
I think he was pretty popular with the Frenchies back then. This
Yeah,
is going to be
probably.
really fun to watch. I don't know if you guys actually know, but the viewers don't. I'm in pre-production for my own documentary feature length at the moment, and so it's always good to just watch more documentaries and inform my own creative choices. So,
Yeah.
looking forward to it. Alrighty. Well, thanks for talking about this movie, Die Weiße Band, and well, we'll be back next time to go look at some blue things, the deep blue sea, maybe that's I think there's a pretty dope submarine in this too, because he's got a
It's
submarine
Jacques,
that, like
it's Jacques
exactly.
Cousteau, baby.
There's got to be some dopeness in this one. Stick around here for all your favorite movie content on Backlot Banter. We'll be back next time. And as I always say, and this is a good one to remember, stay cool, keep warm. Peace.